When I watch TV and those Dos Equis commercials come on talking about the most interesting man in the world, I always find myself laughing because I actually lived with the most interesting man in the world. It was my grandfather, whom I'm actually named after, Coy Squires. I'm aware that most people claim that their grandfather lived some crazy life, but you have to understand that this claim was started because of my grandfather. And there are genuinely too many stories to tell to prove this. So I'm going to try and narrow it down. Stories about him cruising around in Rolls Royces with Saudi princes, doing deals with dictators like Charles Taylor, flying planes because his pilot was too drunk to fly them themselves, and literally so much more. He had very humble beginnings, born in 1926 in a small rural home in Arkansas City, Kansas. He was one of 7 siblings. His destiny was to be a railroad worker like his father and nothing else. But my grandfather, being the stubborn and quick-witted man he was, did not want to accept this fate. So he set out to become a scholar in every way possible, including reading every book in the local library. True story. Eventually, this persistence of hard work paid off, and he went off to attend the University of Oklahoma thanks to the GI Bill. To this day, I truly don't know what he actually did in the Army, to be perfectly honest. But boy, did he used to tell me fantastical stories about what he wanted me to think he did. I remember as a kid, my grandfather had knee surgery. He actually had a few knee surgeries. But I remember clear as day walking into the hospital room where my, at the time, 70-odd-year-old grandfather was laying on the bed. I remember my eyes scanning down his body until they reached his knee, which had a great 12-inch gash in it. And I remember asking him in that moment, "What happened to your knee, Papu?" And without missing a beat, he explained to me how during World War II, he was a gunner in a B-52 bomber. He said that one day on a bombing run, a German plane dropped a bomb on his planes, which happened to land right in his knee, and for whatever reason didn't go off. "That's what the knee surgery was for, to finally get it out so I can stretch my leg again," he would tell me. He had fantastical explanations for all of his surgical scars. Like how he was attacked by a katana-wielding Japanese soldier who stabbed him in his side and down his stomach, leaving an appendix and a heart surgery-sized scar on his body. Now that I'm almost 20 years old, almost 22 years old, sorry, I have to admit that I'm starting to have my doubts about some of the details of my grandfather's great war stories, but back at the age of 7, I was nothing short of sold. After the war, my grandfather finished college with a degree in geology and found himself going overseas in search of his fortune in oil and gas. This led him to living in the Middle East and Africa for the next 50 years of his life, including, but not limited to, Egypt and Libya. Living in Libya, my grandfather used to tell me that he had some, as he liked to call them, interesting neighbors. While living in Tripoli, when I would ask him who, he would casually respond, "Muammar Gaddafi." Yes, the Libyan dictator, Muammar Gaddafi. Although at the time he was just another politician, he was already showing signs of corruption, such as when my grandfather told me that one day he found out Gaddafi had an eye on his Mercedes, and Gaddafi was going to have it taken for himself. So what does my grandfather do? He has it sold in the middle of the night and explains to Gaddafi that it was stolen in the night. My grandfather had endless stories like these about his travels and adventures in the Middle East. My dad's favorite story, which is also a personal favorite of my own, which my dad actually tells all the time, is when my grandfather was creating the geologic map of Egypt. He was in a small prop plane when it threw a piston and went down in the El Alamein minefield. Now, for those of you who are not aware, the El Alamein is the site of 2 major battles between the British and German forces in World War II. This area was the farthest the Germans ever penetrated into Egypt during World War II. And this is probably because the whole area is heavily covered with an estimated 17 million mines. That is not an understatement. The Germans used to call this area the Devil's Garden. So because my grandfather's pilot was aware of this fact and the plane was going down, they averted to a dry riverbed in the middle of the minefield. They managed to land safely, but they were stuck for 3 days while a minesweeping crew cleared a path to bring the parts they needed to repair the plane and take off again. Apparently, in the 3 days they waited for the sweeping crew to get there with the new parts, the only provisions they had was a bottle of water and a candy bar, probably a chocolate bar. My dad eventually went into business with my grandfather, and the wild adventures and stories just continued. They even created an oil and gas company named Saltgrass Petroleum Company. And the two of them traveled all over the world working with governments and other oil and companies trying to get the drilling rights. My dad also loves to tell the story of the big Saudi Arabian meeting. That's what he calls it. He said when they went into the conference room, you could feel the tension amongst the parties. There were no smiles around the tables as 20 plus Saudi billionaires and government officials, including the Minister of Energy and Oil, waited for my grandfather to give the business proposal. When my dad said before the meeting started, my grandfather unexpectedly stood up and started speaking to them in Arabic. He went on, and when he finished speaking, the room, so tense you could hear a pin drop, suddenly erupted in laughter. My dad said he looked around the room in confusion, and the Minister of Oil actually went up to my dad and explained, "Your father-in-law just told a very traditional Egyptian joke. He understands us. We can do business." This is why my grandfather had so many allies all over the world. He understood people, and people listened to what he had to say because of it. This is why he was so successful in landing business deals that no one else was able to achieve without a large company. By the end of his career, he had been to all but a small handful of countries around the world and created the geologic maps of Africa and the Middle East that are still used to this day. My grandfather was always a giving man, looking out for people and never expecting anything in return. He never cared about the money. In fact, I remember him telling me that if it were up to him, he would give it all away. This is why he is one of my heroes and why I strive so hard to be and live like him. He was the reason and inspiration for my 5-month stay in Southeast Asia, actually. I have a travel bug for the adventure just like he did. My grandfather was a great man who actually made an impact on the world, both in the way he brought people together and in the way he brought new ideas into the world. This is why he will forever be remembered and honored in my eyes.